How do we know that all of Israel did not go off into sin during the days of Ahab? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 1 Kings on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 1 to 19. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 1. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 1 Kings chapter 18, beginning at verse 1. And it came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, Go present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the earth. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab, and there was a severe famine in Samaria. And Ahab had called Obadiah, who was in charge of his house. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, for so it was, while Jezebel massacred the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them 50 to a cave, and had fed them with bread and water. And Ahab said to Obadiah, Go into the land to all the springs of water and to all the brooks. Perhaps we may find grass to keep the horses and mules alive, so that we will not have to kill any livestock. So they divided the land between them to explore it. Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. Now as Obadiah was on his way, suddenly Elijah met him, and he recognized him, and fell on his face, and said, Is that you, my lord Elijah? And he answered him, It is I. Go tell your master, Elijah is here. So he said, How have I sinned that you are delivering your servant into the hand of Ahab to kill me? As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to hunt for you. And when they said, He is not here, he took an oath from the kingdom or nation that they could not find you. And now you say, Go tell your master Elijah is here? And it shall come to pass as soon as I am gone from you, that the Spirit of the Lord will carry you to a place I do not know. So when I go and tell Ahab, and he cannot find you, he will kill me. But I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. Was it not reported to my Lord what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, how I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets, 50 to a cave, and fed them with bread and water? And now you say, Go tell your master Elijah is here? He will kill me. Then Elijah said, As the Lord of hosts live, before whom I stand, I will surely present myself to him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab, and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. Then it happened, when Ahab saw Elijah, that Ahab said to him, Is that you, O troubler of Israel? And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, in that you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and have followed the Baals. Now therefore, send and gather all Israel to me on Mount Carmel, the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table. It has now been 3 years, specifically from the New Testament, 3 years and 6 months, since the drought spoken by Elijah the prophet had come to pass during the days of Ahab. Elijah started out this drought staying next to a brook that flowed into the Jordan River, but for the majority of this time, he has been up in Zarephath, staying with the widow and her son, with all of them being miraculously fed by God the entire time from a handful of flour and a little oil. From chapter 18, we get a little context of the likely reason that God had Elijah escape all the way north when the brook dried up near the Jordan. Ahab was looking for Elijah, and Jezebel seemingly was killing all the prophets of God in anger because of the drought. All of this shows God's protection of Elijah throughout this entire ordeal. Now is the time for the drought to end, and so God told Elijah to return to Israel to tell Ahab this. Meanwhile, in Israel, the situation is dire. Ahab had very little water, with the rivers, streams, and underground wells having dried up by this point. It was so bad that Ahab, along with himself, had to send Obadiah, his servant, out to scour for water so that they wouldn't have to start killing the livestock, which would have been a monetary loss for Ahab. Obadiah here is described as one who feared the Lord greatly, so much so that when Jezebel went out to massacre the prophets of God, he took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave, providing them food and water so that they could survive. What Obadiah did not only showed his faith in the Lord, in that he protected God's followers, but that he did so at great personal risk. It's easy to follow the Lord when times are going good, but when our life is in danger, what we do will actually be the determiner as to whether we love the Lord as much as we say we do. There was a water scarcity, yet Obadiah was diverting some of the water and food for the king to those prophets. If Ahab or Jezebel would have found out, not only would these prophets have been killed, but Obadiah would have been killed too. But that Obadiah was faithful to the Lord, and there were other prophets who were too, shows us that not all in Israel had bowed the knee to Baal, something that will become important to remember in chapter 19. Now as Obadiah was out looking for water, he came upon Elijah coming down to meet Ahab. Obadiah recognized Elijah and fell down on his face as a sign of respect. Elijah told Obadiah to go and tell King Ahab that Elijah is here, and it is implied that the message also included that Elijah wanted to talk to Ahab. Now Obadiah asked Elijah what sin he had committed that he was given this task, for Ahab had been hunting for Elijah these 3 years, both in Israel and in the neighboring countries. He had made people take oaths that Elijah wasn't there, oaths that would have meant their death had they lied. And now Elijah was asking him to go and tell Ahab that he knew where Elijah was. Surely Ahab would presume that Obadiah always knew and would kill him. And if that didn't happen, surely in the time between talking to Elijah and getting Ahab, Elijah would be taken away by the Lord. So when Ahab came, Elijah wouldn't be there, meaning that now Ahab would presume that Obadiah had lost a fugitive of the crown and would kill him. Believing this, Obadiah tries to tell Elijah of his faith in God and what he has done in helping the prophets in order to get Elijah to find somebody else, anybody else, to go and do this task. Elijah assured Obadiah that he would in fact stay to meet Ahab and that Obadiah would not die. I'm sure it took courage on Obadiah's part, but Obadiah did as Elijah asked. And true to his word, Elijah stayed to meet Ahab. Now when Ahab arrived, Ahab asked if it was indeed him, the troubler in Israel. In response, Elijah said that he had not troubled Israel, rather it was Ahab who had done so, and his father's house who had forsaken the commandments of God and served other gods. That was the reason for the drought, not because Elijah simply liked to see Ahab suffer. Ahab's attitude here is one that people often have because of sin. It's anyone else's fault but our own. Elijah was not the reason for the drought, Ahab and his sin was. But the current punishment for that was about to come to an end, though God would reserve further punishment for later. Elijah, though, would have to proclaim it first. But first, he wanted all Israel to gather at Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. What will happen next is perhaps the most famous thing Elijah is remembered for, something we'll begin to cover, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 20 to 29, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.